All right, so I am, going. It's a short segment to cover, but I am going through it because I do think it's one of the most important things to understand. Um, the incumbent, the person that is holding office, on average wins 90 to 95% of the time. That's an important thing to look at and think critically about. Is that a concern, or is that just a sign of they're doing a good job in government? Um, we often, in terms of there's often questions about reform, and one of the perennial issues about reform is, should we introduce term limits? Is that a way to combat the incumbency advantage? Would the pros in that case outweigh the cons? You know, on some level, these people get in, and then it seems to cease being democratic because they have all these advantages I'll look at time and time again. But is that offset by the fact that they have this experience? I often equate it to, would you want like a term limit for teachers? On some level, as teachers, get deeper into their career, I don't know, do they get complacent? Are they less willing to innovate? Do they, are they not as in tune with, students as students kind of get younger? Is there a reason maybe to kind of, get rid of them, purge them, and bring in a wealth of kind of new blood? But then at what sacrifice? What's funny is I'm on year 20 here. It's my 23rd year teaching, and I feel like I'm just starting to get good. Just starting to. I mean, I don't, believe me, I don't feel like, hey, I really nailed it today every day. I always feel like, I could do that better. So two kind of things to think about, I believe. We went over, again, why the incumbents have such an advantage. We mentioned name recognition. With everything that they do, it becomes part of the public record. Who they are becomes more familiar. What was that drum I was hitting yesterday? Because, when you go to the polls, and because you know a name, how does it help you in the voting process? I repeated this with like every advantage. Is voting easy? So what is having a name that you're familiar with, what does it do for the process? It simplifies it. Just understand that with each factor, right? It may not be a bad, voting is complex, and we should wrestle with it. But ultimately, at some point, you're going to need a simple construct to help you make your decision. So I don't think it's always an awful thing to try to simplify it. But if what we do is simplify it just based on name recognition, that might be a little bit of a concern, right? We then mentioned experience and expertise. These things are kind of intertwined because with experience and expertise comes the ability to pass legislation and bring benefits. So sometimes it's tricky to talk about things that are intertwined. And I think that what you want to focus on is the identify part that helps you distinguish. So by experience or expertise, what I mean is they've done the job, and therefore they have a familiarity with how to do the job, just the mechanics of it. The timing of when to introduce a bill, the science of how to find the right kind of co-sponsors, the ability to trade favors so that they get, some reciprocity from other members, so that they get the right kind of committee positions. So what I mean by experience in this case is knowing the ins and outs of the legislative process that they can use to their advantage. Now, invariably, again, that's going to simplify a complex process because when you're evaluating who do I want to choose, well, the person that knows how to do the job is typically going to be preferable. What it will also result in is probably a better legislative record. I want a known commodity. One of the things that is a big unknown with Donald Trump that kind of concerns some people is where is he on a lot of these issues? That's a leap of faith, and people were frustrated enough with the political system that they were willing to make that leap of faith. With a congressman that is an incumbent, you don't have to. As I said, they are tracked in the congressional record. Interest groups track them. They give them grades. They give them numbers, and you can make an informed decision. As they pass legislation and as they do their work, too, track record can kind of mean two different things. I've got a track record in terms of knowing what they stood for in terms of legislation and issues, but they've also got a track record of bringing home specific benefits. And this is, again, why we love our congressmen and hate Congress. Because collectively, as they're all bringing home these benefits, it looks like Congress is not working together. They're all kind of doing this selfish grab for themselves. But individually, we all want those perks, right? What was casework? I want to distinguish casework from earmarks and from pork barrel. What's casework?
Like solving constituents' problems.
Yeah, solving constituents' problems. And then you want like an exemplar. You always want an exemplar. So give me an example of what they might help with it.
You would say like the guy who had PTSD.
Yeah.
The veteran affairs.
Good, helping someone receive their veterans benefits. They're suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. They've got a problem with they've been injured and they're having a problem with the prosthesis, and they want an upgrade essentially. They would help you navigate the bureaucracy. Another big category is just dealing with your legal status, thinking about helping you with citizenship status, helping you with maybe an asylum kind of status, helping you adopt internationally if you've lost your passport or some other kind of legal documents, right? So that's casework. It also could involve, too, you're having trouble locally with something, and you want your national representative to put a little pressure on local government. They can do that as well. Now, the next thing we talked about were earmarks and pork barrel, and they're kind of similarly, what do they have in common? They're kind of two terms for the same thing. So what are we doing in legislation?
It's like a line item thing that gets benefits.
Yeah, and I want you to think of it as a line item. In other words, there's a law, there's a bill, it's a spending bill, and it's got a lot of lines, it's got a lot of text, and there is a single standalone line that brings benefit to your state, your district, your locality. So when we call it an earmark, what's the difference between calling it an earmark and pork barrel?
An earmark makes it sound favorable.
Yeah.
And a pork barrel makes it sound sort of greedy.
Greedy, very good. So one is just the kind of generic term for kind of setting aside a little bit of money, just the way you'd set aside a page. You'd fold over the tab of a page so that you'd go back and read it again. Pork barrel sounds more greedy. It has this suggestion of gluttony to it. And it's really, I think, in the eye of the beholder. When you look at these things, do you see narrow, selfish interests with no national benefit or no larger merit? The group Citizens Against Government Waste have got a kind of a whole list of criteria they use when they look at it. And according to them, we're looking at $5.1 billion in pork barrel spending. That has come down over the years. It used to be, there's, again, according to their numbers, there was a point where there was $29 billion being spent in pork barrel politics. So, no matter how you slice it, the numbers are significant. They may be coming down, but that's still a significant number. I made the argument that if the legislative branch isn't designating where the money goes, then the executive bureaucracy does. So on some level, money has to be designated, but it is a concern when you start to look at the bigger or larger list. Again, I have a link that I want to open. I'll open for you, I guess, a little bit later because the internet's, they're not working for me. But you can see things that, again, are in the eye of the beholder, like screwworm research. I don't know how prevalent screwworm is anymore. That if you walked around barefoot and you stepped in something awful, parasites could work their way through your feet and through your body. It's probably important to study and know, but in the grand spectrum, it's really interesting. Diseases kind of compete for research dollars. It's an awful kind of reality. Which cancer are we most concerned about? Are we more concerned about Alzheimer's or Parkinson's? So this is part of the competition for research money. And I don't think we should always think of it as like mutually exclusive. If you get more, I get less. But that is part of the reality. Should we be studying chickens and poultry? Again, maybe because I think just on the surface it sounds kind of ridiculous. You're following chickens around and asking questions. What does this look like? There is probably some economic and health benefits to these things. It does seem to start getting silly when they're freaking out over Goths. And if I was able to scroll down on the list, you'd see other ones that are equally, like there was a lot of money spent on a teapot museum for Sparta, North Carolina. Teapots are nice. They're part of kind of American folk culture, I suppose, if we're looking at, these kind of frontier hand-hewn kind of teapots. It does help preserve culture. It is a revenue generator for Sparta, North Carolina. I could make an argument for why it's important. I could similarly say I think it's money not well spent. It's in the eye of the beholder. All right. Other things, real quickly. The incumbent has a greater ease in fundraising. I want you to think about you're placing your bets on who's going to win the World Series. And the Red Sox just picked up Chris Sale for better or for worse, right? We look like we're just, my God, the pitching rotation right now. And then your Little League team somehow made it into the National League, right? You just kind of they were looking for an expansion team, and it's you guys. Who are you going to bet on? You got $1 million to spend. You're going to bet on the Sox or your Little League team, little hometown team pride, right? When you bet money, you bet on the sure thing. And the people that win 90 to 95% of the time, do you think they're the sure thing? That's who interest groups are going to give money to. And if you've got a lot of money as an interest group, you give to both candidates. Do you get it? They win either way. And ideally what they get is an access. Bless you. I will show you a couple images in a second that help reinforce this. Everything a congressman does, and more so like a president does, is get your media attention. George W. Bush choked on a pretzel. This is George W. Bush. Choked on a pretzel at one point while watching TV, and he kind of almost passed out and he bonked his head. That was national news. Choked on a pretzel, right? So whatever they do draws media attention, good, bad, or ugly. And the interesting thing is any press bad press? You may have learned that in the most recent election cycle, right? If your name is out there in the Twitter sphere, at least they're talking about you. Any news is good news sometimes because it increases name recognition. See how they run into each other? A final one to look at is those perquisites that we talked about. All the things within the office, the benefits that they have in the office, like travel, like the franking privilege. Hey, I can send letters that alert my constituents of what I'm doing in office. I'm not telling you to vote for me. I'm just telling you what you should be aware of in terms of upcoming legislation. And I can do it for free. So I can send hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands of letters and correspondence for free that increase your awareness of who I am and what I do, whereas it's got to come out of pocket for the challenger, right? I can raise a flag over the Capitol and send it to a constituent. I can take a photograph with a constituent. I can have a tour, staffers leading you on a tour, but I can use all those perks to kind of create those lifelong members. Now, if I wasn't rushing, we'd look at some of the drawbacks where's Waldo here? I just wanted a different looking question mark. So I would make you guys think about it a little bit, and ideally what I'd do is take you beyond the it maintains the status quo kind of answer. There's no change kind of answer. What I'd want to see is something more substantial. What kind of problems happen policy-wise? What kind of problems happen in terms of the system and where there's a need for reform? So I try to push you to be not generic but more specific if we had time. Besides the drawbacks to the system, there are some drawbacks for the members, the people that are serving, and I want to look at those real quickly. One, why would you want to be a congressman? People hate you. There is this unfavorable approval rating. You lose the private sector income. Yeah, you're making $174,000 a year, but maybe you could have made a lot more in the private sector. You're having to maintain 2 homes. Again, people don't like you by instinct. You've got all of these competing responsibilities, and again, they are kind of competing. And people don't think you work very hard. They tease you about your workday, which is less than students. But what's hidden in these numbers is this is just a measure of when they're in session. So when they're not in session, when they're not in Congress, in the floor, where are they? They're in their districts, and they're in committee meetings. They're doing other work. Are they working on re-election? Is that work? If you go to a basketball game as a congressman, are you watching the basketball game? Sometimes. There's this great article I read about they basically went to a basketball game and there was a number of passes the member had to make and a number of hands he had to shake every 20 minutes. It was more about increasing profile. So they're always kind of at work. And when you look at the number of hours they actually work, they're working on average 70-hour work weeks. What's the average American work? 40, right? So they're working kind of a double the amount that the average American is working. And the job is getting more complex. I think legislation is getting more complex. Not only are issues more complex as we get more interdependent and global, and there are these big, scary issues that are looming overseas in terms of our foreign affairs. But just look at simple like page length, the bills. In the 50s, it was easy, two and a half kind of page bill that you had to kind of read, study, and understand. Now they average 20 pages in length, and spending bills are thousands of pages in length, well over that. So this is kind of an interesting graphic that shows you, again, what percent pass typically? Bills around 5%. You can see their average kind of going down in terms of the percent passed, but the number of pages that they have to read go up and up. And again, like I said, there is all of this media scrutiny, and any attention is good attention, but man, do they catch you in your worst moments. So, here's the throwing the snow. It's snowing. There is no global warming. They're in session, and everything they're doing is kind of caught, including playing solitaire. They have to travel 36 times a year. Who's flown in the last couple of years? Was it a pleasant experience?
No.
Did you enjoy taking off your belt and shoes and shuffling through anybody have to do the full body scan? Yeah, that one's a little weird, right? That I don't like that one so much. So 36 times a year they have to get there, and they've got a little perks. They've got the kind of the free parking. They can breeze through a little easier, but they still have to deal with these poor old lady. She's a security threat. Couple other quick things too. They face intense scrutiny not just from the media but from each other. They can face censure. This may not seem like a lot, where you do something wrong, and they'll get up on the floor and they'll formally condemn you. They will, come to order. They'll recognize the speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to condemn my colleague, the distinguished gentleman from Massachusetts. And then they'll tell you why you're a jerk, right? Why is this important? Because, it's not a law. It's just they're kind of doing a formal statement. Well, that damages your political capital. If your name is mud, then you don't have an ability to do anything. And if you do enough kind of bad things, they could kick you out. There is not an impeachment proceeding for members, but the chamber kind of judges the qualifications of its own members and can expel people. All right? So with that, is this what you feel like? After doing what is perhaps the most ambitious unit, the legislative branch. All right. And now we get to have a little bit of fun.